Welcome, Dr. Christy, to the Biohacker Babes. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you guys.
This is going to be a fabulous episode. I have really been counting the days to chat with you because we are going to be hitting a really big topic. There's a lot of myths and misconceptions going on around iron. So this is going to be Iron 101 for everyone. I know we're going to learn a lot. Our audience is going to learn a lot. I think some people have heard of iron in a very simplistic way. They think, oh, I have low iron, take an iron supplement. I have high iron, donate blood. If only it were that simple. There's a lot more. So we're really going to break it down for everyone today. But just to kick it off, what do you think is the biggest misconception, and how are we kind of getting things wrong in the world of iron?
Well, I'd have to kind of categorize that into the high iron group and the low iron group. Okay. So with the high iron group, most of the people that have high iron are not getting diagnosed at all. More people get diagnosed with the low iron issues, but a lot of people still don't get diagnosed. They'll go for years with low iron, or they'll go for years. I mean, high iron people go for years and decades with high iron, but a lot of times the low iron people, they'll get diagnosed and maybe their doctor will say, take some iron, but they don't tend to really be good about following up or figuring out why is this person chronically low in iron? Because there's always a reason, whether it's you're menstruating and losing a lot of blood, or if you're have H. pylori. I've seen that a lot, where people have an undiagnosed H. pylori infection or H. pylori, and that causes you to not make enough stomach acid. And then if you don't have enough stomach acid, you're not going to be able to absorb iron and other nutrients. If you're taking an acid reducer, if you're just really stressed out and you have low stomach acid, or if you have some autoimmune condition that's decreasing your ability to absorb, or if you have a GI bleed, there's so many causes of low iron. And I think, undiagnosed celiac disease, the list goes on. The list goes on and on and on. But I think one of the big things with low iron is people will often get diagnosed with, okay, you have low iron, but why is not often addressed. Okay. And then the high iron group, those people are often not getting diagnosed, or if they do, they are very, very ill. And their ferritin is often off the charts high, like a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4,000 is the most common group to get diagnosed. When we really need to be diagnosing people when their ferritin's in the low hundreds. And the best way to diagnose the high iron group is to pre-screen. Well, the best way is just for everybody to get an iron panel and for doctors and patients to understand what it means, and then get this done at least once a year, if not more often. But the other option for the high iron group is they've got to get pre-screened for the genes, because over 30% of the population has one or more of these hemochromatosis genes that increases iron absorption. Most people don't know about it, but the people who develop high iron almost all have one of those genes. So, there's
Wow.
the big myth, and this is the last thing that I'll say because I know I just kind of came out with a loaded gun. But the big thing, the big thing with the hemochromatosis genes is that there's this myth that you have to have 2 genes to develop hemochromatosis, hereditary hemochromatosis, high iron, when in fact you don't need. Most people that I see that develop hemochromatosis have 1 gene. They're just maybe a little bit more subtle of a disease, and so they don't get it diagnosed as easily as fast, but you only 1 is enough to do it. You can develop hemochromatosis high iron with no hemochromatosis genes. Let's say you go on this carnivore diet for a year. I've seen that cause hemochromatosis high iron because you're just eating so much, iron rich absorbable iron. So, I'm sorry. I have it on silent, but my husband can somehow get through. Are y'all gonna be able to edit that out?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Let me just text
Don't
my
worry
husband.
about it. Yeah, we can
It's
edit.
on silent. It's just, I don't know how he does it.
If it's
Don't.
like your
Maybe he called you
emergency
twice.
It doesn't, it's not,
emergency or
that's not
something.
even it. He just, I don't know. It's so awful. Don't call me
That
now.
happens to me too. I'll be meditating. So I turned it on like do not disturb and then it'll ring. I'm like, how is this ringing?
Yeah, I don't
What's
know.
the
I
point of this?
promise you it was on silent. So,
No
okay.
worries. Yeah,
Okay.
okay, a lot to unpack there.
So much to unpack. So we know there are genetic predispositions, but as you mentioned, well, one, people aren't getting screened for them, but two, it doesn't necessarily mean that your lifestyle environment will trigger that. What are some of the lifestyle things that could contribute? Because it sounds like with high iron, it's not always symptomatic. Maybe we have fatigue, but it's kind of rare that people are thinking, oh, maybe I should look at my iron. That's just not a big conversation. What else should we be looking at? Just because we like to start with lifestyle, what could be other contributors to high iron?
So I mean, other contributors would be, that's a good question. Eating a lot of red meat, being a man, because men don't menstruate or give birth to children, so they just don't lose iron as easily. Men, they can still become anemic and become low in iron, but if a man becomes anemic and low in iron, they tend to be like, have a GI bleed somewhere or be taking a high dose of a proton pump inhibitor. Or on top of that, maybe being like a vegan, where, most of the foods that have iron, absorbable iron, the most absorbable form of iron is called heme iron, and that is only found in animal products. So a lot of people think if I'm eating a lot of spinach and iron-rich vegetables, then I'm getting plenty of iron. But the problem is that they are consuming the iron, but they're not absorbing it, because the iron that's in vegetables is called non-heme iron, and that iron is not very absorbable. So being a vegan, being a vegetarian, is a great way to lower your iron if you're high. Although, I'm not a big proponent of being a vegan and vegetarian, and I like to allow people to still continue to eat, animal protein while trying to keep their iron in a healthy range. But if you're low in iron, being a vegan and vegetarian will contribute to being low. So like me personally, I tend to struggle with more of the low iron issues for a number of reasons, which I'm glad to go into if you want to listen to the laundry list. But
we're there too. So saving that one on the back, because I feel like it'll be a very big conversation.
It's an interesting one because so let's have that talk later. But the low iron issues, for me personally, like if I ate a vegan vegetarian diet, I would just die, because I need the iron, I need the protein, I need the fats, I need the cholesterol. Whereas other people that, like some people that have, especially people that have the hemochromatosis gene, I've noticed, if they become vegan and vegetarian, they often feel like a little bit better, or they can at least sustain it. I could never sustain that diet. It would be lethal for me. But for other people, depending on their genes and everything, they can sustain a vegan vegetarian diet, which is low in absorbable iron. I think that's crucial to understand absorbable versus unabsorbable iron, or less absorbable iron.
Right. Yeah. And I just wanted to clarify, because you just quickly mentioned you could be eating too much red meat. And just before people take that and run, because I think there's still a lot of conditioning around red meat being bad, but you just introduced this idea of the bio individuality. So like it's not bad for everybody, but I guess for someone that does struggle with hemochromatosis, is there a general kind of recommendation on how often you could eat something like that?
Yeah. So even in my book, I have this whole section like disclaiming this idea that you need to give up red meat, because I don't think that, grass-fed red meat is an unhealthy food. Grass-fed red meat has a lot of good fats in it, good protein, full amino acids, complete amino acids. It's got, tons of nutrients in it, B vitamins, and it does have iron, which we need for survival. But you can have too much of a good thing. Okay. And we are living in an age where people are trying lots of unique diets. And for some people, that carnivore diet might work just fine, but others, it's not a great thing. And that can cause a high iron situation in some people. So the key really is to look at your iron levels, look at your labs, look at your genes, and pay attention to how you feel. If you feel good and you look good on paper and it's all lining up, that's great. But even like we change with our age. And so what a diet that could be good for you at one age can be different, bad for you later. So for example, like I'm a menstruating female. I need a lot of iron. Okay. As I get older, postmenopausal, I may not need quite as much. And so, for example, like women that have a hemochromatosis gene, they might go most of their life being told they're low in iron, or they've struggled with anemia, and then they become postmenopausal and suddenly they become high in iron because they're not menstruating anymore. So it's not just the individuality that changes, it's us changing with our age and our environmental situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we can start with the genetic part because that seems like an easy step one for everyone. So if people have maybe like a 23andMe or a DNA co, something like that, what are they looking for on that report?
Okay, so that's a good question. So yeah, everybody needs to get their genes and get their labs. And so we can start with the genes. So around 30% of the global population has one of the three hemochromatosis genes, which I'll go over, but most of the people that have those genes are Caucasians. Now, I have seen it in lots of Hispanics too. I work and live in Texas, and we get lots of people that, have come from Mexico or Central America or South America, and they have those hemochromatosis genes too, because years ago when the Spanish went down into South America and Central America, the Spanish, the Catholics, and set up, they brought their genes with them, and that became a part of the population there. So we have to get this out of our head that like only Caucasians are at a high risk for having these genes, although Caucasians are at the highest risk, especially if you have like Northern European ancestry, like Ireland. Over 60% of the Irish population has one of these genes. So it's huge there. So the three hemochromatosis genes, which let's say you've done 23andMe, 23andMe will sequence, well, they'll tell you about two of them. They often sequence the third one, but they don't tell you about it. I created a report called Genetic Detoxification, which you can download 23andMe raw data. You might have to like reach out to 23andMe and ask them to give it to you. And then you can upload that data to the genetic detoxification. And then that will give you that third hemochromatosis gene, along with a bunch of other genes, the well-known MTHFR and APO and lots of things. So, but regarding the hemochromatosis genes, the three genes, I call them like the heavyweight, middleweight, and lightweight, because the heavyweight gene and the middleweight gene, those are the two that 23andMe say you have inherited one risk allele, and then they'll say something like, they'll say inherited one variant, not at an increased risk, which is just BS. Just ignore that. Just ignore their whole evaluation. Yeah. You need to know exactly what you inherited. And if you have one of those genes, you are at an increased risk, and you need to be watching your iron levels closely and letting all of your family members know too, because this is genetic. So the heavyweight, middleweight, and lightweight genes, the heavyweight makes you absorb iron the most out of the three. It just decreases your body's ability to make something called hepcidin. And then if you don't have as much hepcidin, you're going to absorb more iron. Okay, so the heavyweight one is called HFE C282Y. Okay, so, and you can inherit one or two of these genes, because, you can get one from your mom and one from your dad, or none from your mom or dad. So the middleweight one is called HFE H63D, and that will increase your iron absorption, but not as much as the heavyweight C282Y. And it does that by decreasing hepcidin, but it doesn't decrease it quite as low as the C282Y, the really serious one. So people that have two of the C282Ys, like those people are most likely going to get diagnosed with hemochromatosis because they absorb so much iron that it's just almost impossible not to diagnose them. However, they tend to get diagnosed like in really high ferritin thousands, 2, 3, 4,000, and have had decades of damage to their body. Now, the H63D, the middleweight one, if you have one or two of those, that is still a high risk, or if you have one of the C282Y. Any combination increases your risk. It's just some increase more than the other. So then the third hemochromatosis gene, the lightweight one, which still increases your risk for iron absorption and hemochromatosis, is called HFE S65C. And that one is newer. Well, it's not like it's been around for a long time. It's just newer in it being included in the hemochromatosis panels. So it's a mistake that 23andMe doesn't include it. But because if you look at most of the research on these genes, they haven't been including it in the research. And so what we really understand about the risk is not full yet. We have much to learn. So my husband, he got diagnosed with hereditary hemochromatosis years ago, and I did the 23andMe panel on him, found out he had the gene, took him, I told him, you need to donate blood before that because I saw his labs were a problem as far as his ferritin, and his labs were a problem. And I told him, you need to donate blood. And then I realized he had this gene, and we went through the process of getting him diagnosed, and it was much more labor intensive and problematic and than it needed to be, which I can go through that whole story if you want, but it's kind of long. So when we went to the hematologist, they ran the hemochromatosis genes, but they only ran the two, the heavyweight and the middleweight one. They didn't run the lightweight one. And they said, okay, you have one of the middleweight genes, you have H63D, one of them, you're a heterozygote, you have hereditary hemochromatosis, and, we'll deal with it and lower it and go from there. But years later, after I updated my genetic detoxification report, I ran his report and I was like, oh my gosh, you have two hemochromatosis genes. You have the middleweight and the lightweight. So he inherited the H63D and the S65C. So anyways, he had two and he didn't even know it. His hematologist didn't even know it because they ran the hemochromatosis genes like years ago when they hadn't added that third one. So my point is that there's a lot of people that don't know that they have these genes, even if they've had genetic testing done.
Geez. Okay. That's super helpful. I'm going to run mine through the report and see, because I actually don't know if I have any. So I have some homework to do.
Yeah.
Curious to see.
Yeah. And then there are some genes, interestingly enough, I have one of these that decrease your iron absorption, and they increase your hepcidin levels. And so hepcidin is made by the liver, and if you have more of it, then you're going to have less iron absorption. So there are some genes on the TMSS6, and that's on that report too. So, and I made the report really as easy as possible to read. So it says like hemochromatosis genes and then like low iron genes, and trying to make it a little bit easier.
Great. Yeah. Okay. And we'll link to that in the show notes so people can check that out.
Yeah. I'm sure people are always like, how do I get this? Yeah. So not that we have to close the hemochromatosis conversation, but curious about other lifestyle things like giving blood or just paying attention to your heme iron intake, maybe reducing the use of cast iron. What else would you kind of put in that category?
Okay. So I'll start with cast iron. Cast iron is non-heme iron. So it's not really absorbable as far as iron. You will, if you cook like something acidic, like this, if you cook acidic things in it, you will leach out more iron. We mostly use cast iron. Okay. And I'm the only person in the family without a hemochromatosis gene because my husband has two, my daughter has one, and I watch their iron levels closely and it's not a problem. But the iron that is in cast iron, it's a non-heme iron. It's not very absorbable. So I don't think people really need to focus that hard on the cast iron piece.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you were really high in iron, like if you have 1,000 plus, if you have just a really high ferritin and you're working on actively getting it down, you can get rid of the cast iron, just don't replace it with, you know, like a Teflon or anything like that. You know, go to stainless steel or glass or whatever, because I would take cast iron over, you know, Teflon any day. But you know, it's not going to help you get your iron levels lower to have the cast iron. I just don't think it really makes them that much higher. I think that is a misnomer. Okay. But maybe cooking like spaghetti sauce in it is not the best idea. Okay. So, that's the cast iron piece. The donating blood, if you can donate blood, is a great way to lower iron. A lot of people donate blood and they are like unintentionally doing something that's good for them because they are the type of people that have a hemochromatosis gene and they would otherwise go too high. A lot of people are donating blood and it's actually hurting them. It's just the donation places aren't telling them, you know, you're not a good candidate, because the donation place really just looks at the hemoglobin mostly. So, but there, you know, if you feel bad after donating blood, then you might not be the best candidate for donating blood. And really you need a very, you know, a full iron panel, a full CBC to know if you can donate blood, if it's good for you or not. I think everybody should get that done before, because donating blood, that's a medical procedure as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, this idea that I'm doing it for the good of other people, like if you're hurting yourself in the process, then just don't, you're not helping other people more than you're hurting yourself. So, the donating blood is one way to do it if you can. Some people can't because they don't have enough red blood cells or hemoglobin. Even people that have hemochromatosis struggle with that. And for those people, you have to really focus more on like the diet piece. Plus, in my book, The Iron Curse, I have a supplement protocol that you can add to, because there are some supplements that are very, very effective at binding to iron and lowering iron. And they also, everything that I included in those protocols, they will help to also support healing up the damage from hemochromatosis high iron, because hemochromatosis causes a lot of damage to your liver, your brain, your pancreas, your heart. It's very serious. So
can you mention those supplements?
So the supplements and because the Iron Curse protocols, I have like 5 steps, and then step 3 is the supplements. Step 1 is donate blood if you can. Step 2, you know, is talking about diet, and step 3 is the supplement protocol. And this is like very important, and most people are not talking about it. A lot of the hemochromatosis experts, like, I get attacked for this topic. They say I'm just pushing supplements. They say, you know, there's no research. Okay, I have over 600 references in my book, and there are a lot of them on the supplement section for this reason, because I knew what was coming and I didn't feel like, you know, dealing with it. So I just put the references in there and they're all good. So, okay, and I've seen this work clinically too. Okay, so I'm not just saying this because PubMed said it. I actually have seen this work clinically. So the supplements in that protocol, I'm not going to go through all of them because it's kind of lengthy, but the most important ones are curcumin. So turmeric extract is curcumin, and you want to do curcumin instead of turmeric because turmeric has a lot of oxalates in it. And then if you just do the curcumin extract, then you don't get all those oxalates in there. So, plus it's easier to dose. So you just get curcumin. A lot of times people will need, it depends on the person, but a common dose for people that have really high iron is around 3 grams a day. Of course, that needs, you know, everybody's individual. So curcumin's great because it binds to iron and lowers it, but curcumin also helps a lot with inflammation. So iron will create a lot of joint pain in people and deal with a lot of horrible arthritis. And the curcumin helps with that. So you're not just lowering the iron, but you're actually helping with the joint pain. Iron also, like I said, damages the liver. There's like a 200-time increased risk for liver cancer if you have hereditary hemochromatosis. Curcumin actually helps to heal up the liver from iron-induced damage and remove the iron from the liver, remove it from the spleen, and remove it from the brain. So it's really a helpful tool that is not being utilized. Now, the other side of that is a lot of people become anemic from taking a lot of curcumin for inflammation, like autoimmune people. I've done this myself because I have Crohn's, and curcumin is great for Crohn's. Side effect is low iron. So it's something to be aware of.
Is there any safe amount of curcumin for someone that's dealing with low iron? Or you should make sure it's not in any of your
It's pretty
supplements?
powerful. I mean, I think a little bit is okay, maybe like 250 to 500 milligrams a day, but definitely take it away from iron-rich foods, or if you're taking iron, it will bind to that iron and render it unabsorbable, just like calcium does the same thing. So if you're taking a lot of calcium and it can make you anemic, so take that calcium separately from the iron. Okay. Other things that help that are in the supplement protocol, you know how I mentioned hepcidin a couple times? So hemochromatosis people have low hepcidin just genetically, and that causes them to be high in iron. So quercetin actually increases hepcidin, and that helps people to then absorb less iron. So the curcumin helps to bind to the iron and take it out. The quercetin helps to decrease the iron absorption by increasing the hepcidin. And then there's so many other wonderful benefits to quercetin. It's good for your heart, good for your brain, good for decreasing histamines, the list goes on. So other ones, silymarin. So silymarin extract is for the extract of milk thistle. So milk thistle, silymarin extract. Silymarin will bind to iron and help to lower the iron. And it also, milk thistle is really well known for helping to heal up the liver. So this is really convenient when you have people that damage their liver from high iron. Now you have something that is not just helping to bind to the iron and lower the iron, but it's also healing up the liver. So that's convenient. There's more, but I don't know how much more time you want me to spend on this. There's alpha lipoic acid. Alpha lipoic acid binds to the iron, making it not absorb as well. Alpha lipoic acid also helps to lower blood sugar. So hemochromatosis can cause diabetes because it damages the pancreas. So alpha lipoic acid helps with that. And then alpha lipoic acid is also really good at helping to heal up the neurons and protecting the myelin sheath and protecting from and helping with peripheral neuropathy and nerve damage, which happens with diabetic patients, but this also happens with hemochromatosis patients because basically when you have really high iron, everything gets damaged. Your whole body is just rusting from the inside out because you have so much oxidative stress. So that brings me to another category of the supplement protocol, which is to decrease the oxidative stress by increasing antioxidants. Because when you get really high iron, what happens is you get all these free radicals, and the free radicals create all this oxidative stress. And that oxidative stress will damage the cell membrane. And that then leads to something called ferroptosis. And ferroptosis is basically iron-induced cell suicide. If you get high iron, damaged cell membrane, and low glutathione, that's the recipe for ferroptosis. And ferroptosis is, the cell's basically saying, okay, I'm going to die so that I don't create cancer immediately, but in the long run, there's a lot of health problems related to the cell committing suicide and dying underneath this environment. So we want to limit ferroptosis. And the supplement protocol, the Iron Curse protocol, has whole section on limiting ferroptosis by increasing glutathione, but not NAC. A lot of people think NAC, but NAC actually increases iron absorption. You have to do like either S-acetylglutathione or liposomal glutathione. Vitamin E will decrease that ferroptosis. Even melatonin will help decrease ferroptosis. I have a nice chart in the back of that chapter that has like it all laid out really easy. So you can kind of say, hey, I need this, this, and this.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I'm going to recommend everyone get the book because there's so much nuance and it's so personal. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I go through like all the contraindications as far as, okay, maybe you don't want to take this if you're trying to avoid blood thinners or whatever. So, because there are some contraindications out there for supplements and everything. And so I have all that in there to try to make it as, useful and foolproof as possible.
Thank you for doing that. Yeah. I think sometimes people think like supplements, because they're not drugs, they can only do so much harm. There's no side effects. And it's like, they're powerful nutrients. They can do a lot. And I'm so glad that you're sharing this information. And to be honest, I had never heard the curcumin link, and I've had low iron for most of my life. So thank you for.
Do you take a lot of curcumin?
Not like right now, I'm not taking any, but like for sure in the past, I've tried a bottle here and there. Just being in this world, people send me products and, you hear all the glorious things about curcumin. It's like, who wouldn't want to fight inflammation? But who knows? Maybe that was making it worse. But I know there's a lot more of that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
My question is why have you had low iron for so long?
It's $1 million question.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not $1 million.
Iron.
I know. You could probably figure it out right away. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe we can switch to more like the low iron conversation, what we need to be looking into with our labs.
Yeah. Okay, so for low iron, regardless of if you have high iron or low iron, you always want to get the full iron panel and the CBC because that's the starting point. So let's talk about those. I like to also add a comprehensive metabolic panel because that'll give you your liver enzymes. And if you do have high liver enzymes, then you must make sure you do not have high iron because while alcohol can cause high liver enzymes, it can also, iron can cause high liver enzymes, and alcohol actually increases iron absorption. So does testosterone.
Okay, even more tequila, I guess. No, just kidding.
Yeah, your problem is you have an alcohol deficiency. There you go. You can give me $1 million.
It's going to do all the opposite things from before.
Okay, so the labs that you need. So you need the CBC. And the CBC will tell you your hemoglobin, your hematocrit, your red blood cells. It'll also give you like white blood cells and stuff. But for purposes of iron, you're going to look really hard at making sure, you're not, if you have low iron, you're going to get more low red blood cells, low hemoglobin, low hematocrit. If you have low iron, you can also get like MCV, which is the size of the red blood cell, that can get low on the CBC if you're low in iron. If your MCV gets too big, too high, your red blood cell gets too big, you get a high MCV, and that can be from low B vitamins or too much alcohol. So that's a problem because if your red blood cells get too large, then they'll break as they go through the capillaries. And then that can release a bunch of iron. And you can then have too much iron in your blood, but over time you get like low anemic often. So that's a little nuance. So the CBC will give you the red blood cell, hemoglobin, hematocrit, really important. People with high iron often develop high red blood cells, high hemoglobin, high hematocrit, but not always. And if you do have high red blood cells, hemoglobin, hematocrit, then you're probably a pretty good candidate for removal of blood, like blood donation, because if you have really high red blood cells, hemoglobin, hematocrit, your blood's getting thicker, and then you're more likely to get a clot. So this is really common, like people that take testosterone. The testosterone will increase not just their iron absorption, but it'll also help them make more red blood cells and hemoglobin and hematocrit. And then they end up with often high iron and really sludgy, thick blood. And this is why a lot of people that take testosterone get clots. So it's worth knowing about. So there's the CBC, everybody needs to know that. And then there's the iron panel. And the iron panel includes the ferritin, which ferritin, it is the best way for us to approximate how much iron storage you have. However, ferritin is also an inflammatory marker. So in some cases, you'll get like a high ferritin, but you don't have high iron in the blood, and that's called anemia of inflammation. Basically, you can get low iron and high ferritin, and that's anemia of inflammation, anemia of chronic disease. It's the same thing. And what causes that is high hepcidin. Okay, so like when remember how hepcidin, when it goes up, you have less iron absorption. So when your immune system is really smart, and it's always trying to protect you. And the immune system knows that iron is like fertilizer for infections, parasites, viruses, bacteria. Iron is fertilizer, except for there's a couple exceptions, like Borrelia, which causes Lyme, doesn't like iron, it likes manganese, but for the most part, everything else likes iron, and it will feed off of iron. And so the immune system has this trick where it increases the hepcidin, and then the hepcidin decreases the iron absorption, and then the iron gets low in the blood because basically the immune system said, get it out of the blood and put it into the liver and the spleen and then the intestinal lining, and the ferritin gets high because now all the iron's gone out of the blood into storage, and it's like a hoarder just cleaned out their house by putting everything in the closets. But if you open up the closet, it's all going to come out. And that's what hepcidin did, okay? So you're not absorbing the iron, but you had to put it somewhere. Okay, so that was a tangent, but basically ferritin, people that have hemochromatosis, high iron, their ferritin gets high because their iron levels are getting higher and higher and higher as the ferritin goes higher. And lab ranges for ferritin are a problem. Many lab ranges for ferritin will let you go up to in the 400s before they flag you, and that's not good. I never like to see ferritin over 100. In some cases, I'll even want to see it below 100, but my cutoff is 100. And some people have other opinions, and that's fine, but I've never personally seen anybody's health improve by going over 100. Okay, and there's a really good meta-analysis that I have in the Iron Curse, and they looked at ferritin, and they started at 200. Unfortunately, they should have started earlier. They should have started at 100, but they started at 200, and they went to 300, 400, 500, 600. And what they found was that when you go from 200 to 300 to 400, 500, 600, there is a direct correlation with mortality, all-cause mortality, to the effect, and the higher your ferritin, the shorter your life, which to the effect it could take decades off of your life. People in the over 600 group, they could decades off their life. Now, they should have just kept going. They should have done 100 all the way to like 2,000. And then that would have been even more revealing as far as what is really going on here, because over 600, that could be 4,000, that could be 601. I don't know. Now, but it's very clear that you don't want to be in the high range of ferritin.
Yeah.
Okay.
What about the low range of ferritin? Because that seems like a lot of people don't agree on that either.
100%. Yeah. So a lot of labs will let you go down to like 15 before they flag you for low ferritin. And that's too low. That's too low. I never really like to see ferritin below 30. Ideally, I like in females like myself that have been, struggling with low iron. Ideally, I want them like around 60, 75. That's a challenge for females struggling with low iron. If you can get them up there, they're doing much better. Now, on the other side of the coin, if it's somebody that has struggled with hemochromatosis, then they often need to be like, try to keep them down around 50 or lower, just because they tend to pop up. So it's a little bit relative to where you've been in your genes, which is why I think everybody needs to have their genes done so that they know, are you somebody that absorbs iron or not? I had a lady recently who she struggled with anemia for years. I'll get back to the iron panel. I'm just going to tangent here. She struggled for anemia for years. And then she comes in and it turns out she has H. pylori and she gets rid. But before that, we found out, oh, she has a hemochromatosis gene. And I'm like, why is this postmenopausal female anemic with a hemochromatosis gene? There is something seriously wrong here. Like, and I figured you must have a GI bleed. Okay. You've got to be losing iron through your gut or you're not absorbing it. So did an H. pylori breath test. It comes back positive. She goes to the gastroenterologist, gives him the test. Oh, this is funny. She starts taking this powder. It's this powder called Epigenozyme GI Complete, and it like helps heal up the gut. And so she starts taking that before she gets the colonoscopy EGD, and it heals up her stomach. And so the gastroenterologist goes in and she looks with the scope and she's like, this doesn't look like H. pylori, but she does a biopsy because the patient came in with a piece of paper that said, I have H. pylori from the breath test. And so the gastroenterologist is like, okay, we did the biopsy, but your stomach looked fine. So I don't think you have H. pylori. I think that's wrong. But then the biopsy came back positive. She has H. pylori, which is ridiculous that they did the biopsy in the first place because a breath test is an extremely accurate H. pylori test, but they did. And so she got rid of the H. pylori and her iron levels shot up like very quickly because she has this hemochromatosis gene. Now, like, she no longer has H. pylori. Her stomach's making stomach acid. She's not bleeding anymore. Her stomach's healing up, all this stuff. And her iron levels like shoot up. And now I'm like, okay, you now need to be like, watch for hemochromatosis. Like, you now are going from one extreme to the other. So, but most people wouldn't like advise, they would just be like, oh, great, you don't have anemia anymore. Just keep taking iron. I'm like, you have to stop taking iron. Now we need to make sure you don't get too high. So anyways, that was kind of interesting. I'll go back to the iron panel.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So ferritin, we talked about that. And then TIBC and UIBC. TIBC and UIBC, they go inverse. Like if you're high in iron, they go low. And if you're low in iron, they go high. So
okay.
And I can explain what they are if you want, or
Yeah. I'm looking up, I have my iron panel here because I wanted to be able to reference it. And I couldn't find UIBC on any of my recent labs. I have TIBC. Is it common?
Sometimes they don't run the UIBC. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes they don't. The company that whenever I do it, it always has the UIBC, but sometimes they don't have the UIBC. It's okay if you don't have the UIBC. UIBC is just the unsaturated iron binding capacity, and the TIBC is the total iron binding capacity, and they will both be low. Like if your TIBC is high because you're anemic, then your UIBC is probably going to be high too. So it's okay that you don't have both, but ideally you have both because sometimes just one of them will be out of range and the other one isn't. But regardless, if you're really looking closely at the ranges, like if your TIBC is close to high, then there's a good chance your UIBC is going to be close to high or lab high out of range. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what is the optimal range for TIBC?
So
it depends on
I don't tend to think that much about the TIBC and UIBC ranges. I just look for low and high on those. But what I do think really closely about is the iron saturation. And the iron saturation is a formula where they look at the TIBC and the serum iron, because the serum iron is like a snapshot of how much iron you have in your blood at that moment in time. It's kind of like if we check your blood for glucose at that moment in time, you have, however much glucose. So The serum iron, this is why you always want to do the iron panel fasting, because we want to apples to apples know how much iron do you have in the morning, basically, without eating anything. So the serum iron, there's a formula for the iron saturation where you look at the serum iron and the TIBC, and then you multiply it by 100, and then that gives you your iron saturation percentage. And that's what you have to pay close attention to. Iron saturation is an important one because the labs allow you to go too high on that one too. And for hemochromatosis, like if you're over 45 with a high ferritin, that's hemochromatosis right there. Okay, so 45, but most labs let people go up to 55% on the iron saturation, which is too high. So, you know, if you're a hemochromatosis patient, you probably want to try to get your iron saturation down into the 30s or maybe high 20s. If you're a low iron person, again, try to get into the 30s. But the iron saturation is most important for the hemochromatosis patients because, as you know, if they're creeping around 40 and they have a ferritin over 100 and a hemochromatosis gene, like they are in very dangerous waters that there's no lifeguards on duty to save you and pull you out of them before you go under. Okay, so iron saturation is important for that reason. So, but that's the whole iron panel. Now, a lot of people will look at, they'll want to look at copper or ceruloplasm, and that's fine. That's great. I don't think it's as important to look at those. I don't really have a problem with people taking copper. It's pretty easy to get rid of excess copper if you have, as long as you don't have the genes that cause you to get high in copper, which are very rare. I do have those on the genetic detoxification report for the most part too, but it's pretty easy. The body has a way to get rid of extra copper through the bile. The body doesn't have a great way to get rid of extra iron. So most people, they tend to have issues with too much iron, not too much copper. So, but if you are low in copper, that can cause iron deficient anemia because you need copper to absorb iron. Okay?
Right.
So you need
that's
it.
super important. Yeah. I don't know what your thoughts are on like a hair mineral test, but my recent test showed very high copper. I was like, that's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't feel like I've done a fair number of hair mineral tests, and I don't feel like they always line up the way that I would expect based on everything else that's lining up. So I kind of have a hard time. Now, where I really like hair mineral tests is if I'm looking for heavy metals like mercury or something in the hair. I think that's really helpful. But when it comes to copper and iron, personally on my hair mineral tests, like I've seen a little bit lower iron on my hair mineral test, and my copper never really got really high. I don't think necessarily because you have high copper on your hair, you're high in copper. Like I would get a red blood cell copper test to see what your copper levels are.
Got it.
And sometimes the body has like a weird way of putting things in the hair that don't necessarily make sense.
Right. Is it just excreting it? Is it high in it? Is it storing it? Like I feel like there's just so many variations.
I don't know. I'm gonna pass on that one because I don't want to give bad advice.
No problem.
The red blood cell copper is a really good blood test for that, for looking at copper. Serum copper, not as good, but easier to do. That's the problem. Ceruloplasm is an inflammatory marker. So ceruloplasm is an enzyme that needs copper, and you need ceruloplasm to help you to move iron throughout the body and absorb iron and transport it. So if you have really low ceruloplasm, sometimes taking copper will help get that higher. Or if you have even mildly low ceruloplasm, sometimes taking copper will help get that higher, assuming you don't have like a gene that creates a problem like Wilson's disease. But if you have a high ceruloplasmin, that can happen with like inflammation, pregnancy, things like that. So, but being low in copper is called copper deficient anemia, and copper deficient anemia on labs looks very similar to iron deficient anemia, like low red blood cells, low hemoglobin, low ferritin, low iron, but they also sometimes get low neutrophils and low white blood cells. So that's also a way to kind of distinguish it sometimes.
Okay.
And then sometimes, I've been hearing this more lately, people that take copper, sometimes that'll help with decreasing their histamine responses. So that's also something to consider.
Interesting.
Great.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to talk about some of the big drivers of low iron. I mean, you mentioned kind of the big red flag things like a GI bleed or infection like H. pylori. What else are we looking at that would contribute?
Yeah. So, okay. I'm just going to give you like a real short history here of me, and then that'll kind of lead you into more weird things that cause low iron that most people don't know. So I have an autoimmune disease. I have multiple autoimmune diseases. Okay. I have Crohn's, which because of Crohn's, when I was 16, they removed a part of my small intestine, the last foot of my small intestine. And because of that, I have to take a bile sequestrant because the bile is all absorbed in the last foot of your small intestine. And if it doesn't get absorbed in the last foot of your small intestine, it'll go into the large intestine and act like a laxative. So I have to take this bile sequestrant. So because of this bile sequestrant, and also because I'm missing part of my small intestine, I do not absorb iron very well. So because you do need bile to help to absorb minerals like iron, just like you need acid in your stomach. Well, I also have an autoimmune disease that attacks the pyloric cells, the acid-producing cells of my stomach. And so I don't make enough stomach acid. And so I have to take a little bit of stomach acid, a little bit of HCl whenever I eat, because if I don't, then I'm not going to be able to, break down the protein, and I'm not going to be able to absorb the nutrients, especially minerals like iron. I also have a celiac gene, and I don't eat gluten. And I think ultimately it was the first 16 years of my life of eating a lot of gluten and kind of processed food and all that stuff that my, medical doctor father fed me, and pharmacist mom.
Oh, wow.
All that healthy
Wow.
processed fast food, that really kind of set me up for these other autoimmune issues. But celiac disease is a common undiagnosed thing, cause of low iron, because if you have celiac disease, then you're likely going to not be absorbing nutrients because your intestinal villi will often get damaged. And then when they get damaged, you don't absorb anything very well. So iron often gets diagnosed as low iron because of all the nutrients that we consume. Iron is tested more than like magnesium or, manganese or copper or B vitamins. But people with these digestive issues tend to get low in everything. And if you can, fix the underlying problem, you're not just helping them get their iron back up, but you're also helping them get a lot of other things up, whether it's, vitamin B3 or whatever. I also, this is going to sound like I'm making this up, but it's true. When I was about 20, I nearly died of pellagra, which is low vitamin B3. I weighed around 70 some odd pounds, and I was just totally emaciated because everything I ate was just going through me. I was on a very limited diet at that point in time. Like, I knew I couldn't eat gluten. This was a long time ago, so there wasn't as much information about gluten and all that. So, but I got very, very low in vitamin B3, and I went to a doctor that helped me figure it out. And I started taking the vitamin B3, and like my digestive system turned a corner that day, and I gained the weight back over the course of the next month or so. So,
Wow.
but people with Crohn's and celiac, you know, they deal with lots of nutritional deficiencies. People without those issues deal with nutritional deficiencies. I mean, we are a fat, obese, nutritionally deficient culture here in America. So that's
Yeah.
because the food that we eat is nutritionally deficient and full
Right.
of, you know, crap. So
Yeah, and then you add all the glyphosate. Like I don't even think you can get wheat in the United States that's not covered in glyphosate, which is damaging the
yeah,
gut immediately.
yeah,
Yeah, a
yeah. We
nightmare.
all need to move to Europe.
Yeah.
It's interesting how many
Yeah.
people they go to Europe and they're like, oh, I felt
feel
so much
fine.
better, or my stomach was better, I could eat whatever. And then they come here and it's like, what are we doing? We're killing ourselves, or we're
Yep.
letting corporations kill us. And then we get to pay other corporations to give us the medicine to continue to prolong our dying. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
definitely experienced that in Italy. I ate like pizza and pasta twice a day, and I was like, I feel great. I mean, I still eat a little bit of gluten now. I probably shouldn't eat any, but I am going back to Europe in a couple weeks, and I'm like, I'm very excited to see how the food does there, because I don't think I can do gluten free in Switzerland. It's a tough one.
Yeah. 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 I can't do gluten in Europe
At
because
all.
I have a just full-blown celiac.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the people who don't have full-blown celiac because they don't have a celiac gene, or they just have like a wheat allergy or mild gluten sensitivity, they can often get away with eating gluten because the gluten in Europe is not hybridized. Like here in America, we have this dwarf hybridized wheat that is like extremely more gluten containing for shelf stability, but it just creates so much damage. And then they throw Roundup on top of that to help dry it out. And, you know, it's just
Yum.
criminal.
Yummy.
Yeah.
So
Lucky
Yeah.
us.
yes, yes. So,
Okay.
so
Yeah, so that
a
makes
lot of
sense.
people are dealing with gut issues and low iron because of all of these things we've talked about. So, you know, I'm trying to think of other things that cause low iron that often don't get.
So
The
generally autoimmune, which is a big condition. If there's stress, the genetics for it, or
yeah,
anything that's triggering inflammation in the body. What about heavy metals?
heavy metals as far as causing low iron,
Yeah,
or
high or
just in
low.
general.
Yeah, in
I
general,
mean,
causing an inflammatory response,
yeah, I
being
mean,
foreign in the body.
if you have heavy metal, if you're like, okay, so for example, lead. Lead can cause anemia, actually. So lead, it will damage your body's ability to make red blood cells, but lead can also bind to iron. Okay. So what's interesting is when you have too much lead, you can take iron and you can take calcium to bind to that lead so that it has something to bind to, so that it's not like binding to your bones and getting in your organs. But yeah, heavy metals, mostly lead, is the one that affects the iron the most because it can bind to iron and it can damage your ability to make red blood cells. And yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one because really nobody should have any lead in their body. Like the labs vary on what they allow, but really you should like have zero all the time. Because if you have a low level of lead, then you probably are getting like chronically exposed to a little bit of lead. And that can cause anemia, but that can also cause a lot of other weird things that are often not diagnosed. Yeah, I've got to.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
see that quite as often, but if you are still in a house that had lead paint, or I've had clients with lead in their water, surprisingly, but
I had the weirdest lead case. This girl, okay, so she was having all this weird face pain, and like her teeth were like hurting on the left side, and her dentist says, hey, go see Dr. Sutton and get, checked. And so she had a lot of mercury fillings and she thought, oh, this must be mercury. So we did this. Are you familiar with the Quicksilver tri-mercury test? Blood,
Yes.
urine, hair. So we
Love
did that.
test.
It was great because I was thinking this is probably mercury because she had so many mercury fillings. I thought this is just leftover nerve damage from mercury. And then we did the test and she was actually not that bad on mercury. She was off the charts high on lead. And then she went to another doctor who did the lead test and she was in a normal range, but the range on Quicksilver was different. So, okay, so that was interesting. So, but the reason she was high in lead is because, so she is in the antique business. And in her house, she had this like pantry cabinet that she would get her cups and put them upside down. And then the pantry cabinet had lead, like they had redone it and she had peeled the paint and done everything, but it still had like lead all within it. And she would get her cups and turn upside down and then she'd pick them up and drink from the cups and just get a little bit of lead, a little bit of lead, a little bit of lead.
Oh,
no. And that was what it was. So she got rid
of
of that pantry cabinet, did a bunch of detox stuff. And, this whole thing got so much better. She was so much better. But what she had to do, I told her, I was like, you have to go around your house with, those little, if you go to Lowe's and Home Depot, you get the little things you break to test for lead in your house. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Okay, so this is what you do. I did this with my daughter when I was about to put her in a tub that was lead lined, and I didn't because I found out, oh, this tub's lead lined. I can't put her in this water. You go to Lowe's and you get these little like cylinder. It's just these little lead tests, and you break them, and it puts this fluid into the little cotton, and then you rub the little cotton on things, and if it turns red, there's lead there. So like I did that, she did that on the pantry, and that was the only lead thing she had in her house. I did that on an old bathtub at the old house we lived in, and my daughter was like an infant, we were gonna bathe her in this bathtub eventually. And I was like, oh, let me check this bathtub for lead lining, because what happens is the porcelain gets eroded down and then the lead lining gets these little tiny circles. And I went and I just checked that for lead and they turned red. And I was like, mayday, mayday, we can't go in this bathtub. I texted my husband, I called my husband, like, we have to move. And it's like, okay, we'll figure it out. But
was it an older house? Did you say?
Yeah,
older
like
house.
the 50s. Yeah.
Oh, 50s. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So the older houses with, like the kind of big older bathtubs, those are often lead lined. So it's something to know about and think about. But yeah, lead is, around, and poor people in Flint, Michigan that, got it all in their water. But if you see it, it's a problem and it can create low iron. Mold can cause low iron, like mycotoxins can also damage your ability to make red blood cells, making low iron issues. Being low in B vitamins can create more issues with absorbing iron as well. So there's lots of things. Yeah, I have lists in the book.
Before the red blood cells, like they get bloated without the nutrients, so then they're kind of bursting and releasing.
Well, there's that, but then also if you're low in folate, it's hard to absorb iron. So like folate, vitamin C, these things help increase iron absorption. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one that people miss, not getting enough vitamin C, because maybe some people are taking a daily, but if you're really anemic, we need pretty consistent higher doses.
Right. And then on the other hand, if you're really high on iron, you probably need to let the high dose vitamin C go, or just take that totally separate from anything iron related.
Yeah.
Well, one last thing. If you're high in iron, this is important to know because iron, but coffee and tea, if you're drinking coffee and tea with food, especially iron-rich food, it will decrease iron absorption. So some people, like if they drink a lot of coffee, they might struggle with, or tea, they might struggle with anemia just because they drink so much coffee and tea. So these are
Okay.
I'll
important
stop
things to know.
drinking my coffee with my steak, at least.
If you're
Less-
low in
less
iron, if you're
coffee.
high in iron, keep drinking the coffee with your steak, unless you,
Yeah.
you know. But yeah,
Okay.
so I have lists in the book that like all of the causes of low iron, all of the causes of high iron, and you just have to work your way through them and kind of figure it out.
Okay.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay.
I love that. Such a
Yeah.
blueprint.
Less coffee, more tequila. No.
Yes. No.
Yeah. Lots
Well,
of takeaways. Yeah.
it needs to be a margarita because then you get the vitamin C too.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. There you go.
I'm
There you
joking. I'm
go.
joking. I'm not
A
advocating
skinny-
alcohol.
A skinny margarita. Amazing.
No, and a
Dr.
dose of
Christy,
humor because
well,
it helps us to remember. It's good.
yes.
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much. We could totally keep you here all day. There's just so
Thank
much here.
you.
So everyone listening, I'm hoping everyone learned a lot from Dr. Christy today. We are going to link in the show notes your book, your Iron Curse course, all of your courses, your Facebook, your Instagram, because I know people are going to want to follow you and learn more. So thank you for all that you're doing. We're so grateful for your work.
Thank you for your work and
Thank
your
you.
awesome podcast.
Thank you. Trying to spread the word.
Thank you.
All right. Well, one final question for you, though. Can you leave our audience with a piece of advice, something they should start doing today to optimize their health?
Get really some good labs and know what you're dealing with. You know, get the iron panel, get the CBC, get the comprehensive metabolic panel, get your vitamin D, get inflammatory markers like CRP and homocysteine, urinalysis. Get your genes. Figure out, do 23andMe, run it through the genetic detoxification, figure out if you have a couple genes that can set you up for health problems, but you can avoid those health problems if you have information and know what to do. So, you know, find those potential health landmines and diffuse them before they go off.
That's great.
Diffusing health landmines. I like that a lot. Yeah.
Yes. Test, don't guess. That's great.
Thank
All
you
right,
so much
everyone
for
get
your
labs.
education and sharing so much
you.
about iron and helping to dispel these myths. This was hugely informational today. Can you tell our audience, other than your book, where else they can find you?
Well, the Iron Curse website has some information, and then my website, Dr. Christy Sutton, and that is a great place to find me. And then I've got Instagram and Facebook, you know, Dr. Christy Sutton, all that. So I'm pretty easy to find, I think. I try to make myself accessible.
Thank you. We're so grateful for that.
Thank
and that'll
you.
be down in the show notes. So go find Dr. Christy. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today and sharing your wisdom.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
And thanks to everyone that tuned in. We will see you next time.